Hello, and welcome to the Big Five podcast from Northumbria University Psychology Department, where we will ask 5 big questions and learn some facts about human behavior and experience. Today is a very special episode because we are talking about the Northumbria Psychology Sustainability Research Prize. And I have with myself today 3 special guests. Dr. Gillian Pepper, who's our departmental sustainability lead and who has created this special prize. Matthew Wright, who was one of the Sustainability Prize judges, who's going to talk to us today about his judging experience on the prize and how students work together to pick a prize winner. And finally, we have Dr. Michael Smith, who is the winner of the Northumbria Psychology Sustainability Research Prize. So thank you all for joining me today and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. So to start with, Gillian, would you like to tell us a bit about what the Sustainability Prize is and what kind of inspired you to start this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the sustainability lead for the psychology department, which means that part of my job is to care about both the sustainability of our practices, so things like whether or not we're being green in our labs, for example, but also about how our research can support sustainability. And the idea for this prize came because there are these, been this urgent global kind of call to action from the United Nations around what they're calling the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And this call to action is around kind of not just sustainability in the traditional sense that we might think around, sort of being green, recycling, worrying about climate change, but a much broader concept of sustainability about having, I guess, healthy, happy, well-functioning societies that are also developing in a sustainable manner that is good for the planet. And that call, it was around 2015, they launched these Sustainable Development Goals, was adopted by all the United Nations member states, including the UK. And so a lot of big organizations in the UK, such as universities, are now spending quite a bit of time thinking about how they can support those goals and how they can contribute to them. And so as part of that, one of the things that we wanted to do in the department was like an exercise to map the research that we do within the department and how that supports the sustainability goals. And actually, the interesting thing, so I'll just tell you what a few of the goals are. I won't list all of them. There are 17, so it goes on for a while. But a few of the goals, because they're quite broad and they all involve human areas of activity, it's really surprising how many of them are touched on by psychology. So we have goals such as no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, which of course will include psychology, quality education, gender equality, reduced inequalities, responsible consumption and production. So things like, what do we eat, what do we buy? Climate action, which of course involves cooperation and negotiation and things that psychology can really speak to. And even things like peace, justice, and strong institutions, which is one of the goals, have a lot of elements of kind of human interaction and human psychology in there. So when we did this task of kind of mapping the work that was going on in the department, what we found was there's an awful lot of bits of work that support the goals in one way or another, but that people didn't necessarily think their goals were relevant to sustainability for a start. And also that some people wanted to do more sustainable research, but weren't really sure whether they could or quite how to go about it. And so I guess the idea of the prize was to celebrate the work that's already happening around Sustainable Development Goals and kind of encourage people by seeing that work being celebrated to do things that can contribute themselves. And actually also a little bit, we wanted to encourage impact. So this round of the prize was kind of has been a pilot run, and we're hoping to develop it more now so that hopefully the prize that the winners get will be related to helping them develop their impact. And finally, we wanted to involve students. So partly this really helps, like, in terms of the sort of sense of community between staff and students to have the interaction, but also students make really great independent judges, I think. So they naturally have an outside perspective. And because when we do the judging, what we've done is we have people submit a paper that they've written in the past 5 years, and to explain why they think that paper is going to actually help support impact in the sustainable development goal that they've chosen. So they choose one of the 17. So it might be zero hunger or no poverty, and they'll say why they think that piece of work is relevant to that. They only get a short little 300 words to do that, so they really have to sell it. But then the students, because they have this outside perspective and they're not kind of like bogged down in that research, and they don't necessarily know the people who've done the research, I think they can be really quite good impartial judges of whether or not that research has the potential to be impactful. And even though we anonymize the papers, so I take all the names off before I give them to the students to judge, there's also this, they have this kind of independence that, you know, they're not part of the university or the faculty, sort of, you know, it's not people judging people they know. It's kind of a bit more independent than that. And actually, I did ask the panel, and Matthew will be able to tell you more about this, but I did ask them to confess if they'd guessed who any of the papers authors were, and they did say they couldn't guess. And so I think having a student panel is a really nice way to involve the students with what we do, but also they just make good independent judges. So yeah, just to wrap that up, I guess, you know, the idea of the prize is to really encourage and celebrate the work that's happening to support the SDGs, but also maybe to inspire people who would like to do that kind of work, to kind of give them examples to think about.
Awesome. I have a detailed question. Do you know how many people put papers in for the prize?
This year we had, what was it? It was 4 papers, wasn't it, Matthew?
Yes, it was 4 that we had to judge. I don't know in terms of overall entry that you had to cipher through. I'm not sure about that, but there was 4 we had to judge yet.
Yeah. Excellent. So yeah, hopefully this can inspire some more people to focus on those sustainability goals or see how their work links with the sustainability goals. That's great. Thank you for giving us that rundown of those goals. Matthew, can you tell us a bit about your experience of what it was like to be a judge on the panel, and what kind of things the panel focused on or debated about the papers? Just a bit about that experience.
Yeah, it was a new experience for me. I've never really judged anything, to be perfectly honest, and it was kind of sold to me, the experience, that it would be quite not a very time consuming thing. It would be just a couple of hours here and there to focus on each paper. And I wanted to do it just to get a bit more accustomed to reading research papers and learning about different areas. And we had regular meetings, well, every 6 weeks or so, wasn't it, Gillian, that we kind of come together, and it was quite interesting to see how far apart we were in terms of things sometimes. So there was a bit of minor alteration in terms of some scores here and there, and yeah, so we were quite drawn to Michael's paper because, and personally, anything that promotes good health and well-being kind of just captures my interest. So that was kind of a big sell for me. So yeah.
Awesome. What kind of criteria were you using to judge the papers?
So it was just on a scale from 0 to 10. Obviously 0 not meeting the sustainability goal, and 10 hitting it quite vastly. So that's what we were doing, and we just kind of had a sheet to mark it on, and after we'd read the paper, and just a couple of little comments.
Awesome. So Michael, do you want to tell us a bit about your prize-winning paper and how it meets those sustainability goals?
Yeah, sure. So, certainly thank you, Matthew, and your team of student judges, not only for choosing my paper, but also because I think it's a great thing that you're doing, and I think it's fantastic for all the reasons that Gillian outlined, that we've got students involved in judging. So I think that's fantastic. And also thanks to Gillian for coordinating the prize and for all the work that you do around sustainable development in the department, especially in relation to our research. So essentially, this paper related to some of our work on expressive writing to enhance well-being. I'll only cover that fairly briefly because I've actually talked about this on a previous podcast with you.
Yes, you have indeed.
But essentially, this program of work that we have that's eventually ongoing and that we're developing all the time relates to how we can train people to write expressively about their thoughts, their emotions, their feelings, and how this can enhance various aspects of well-being. We're also interested in different groups of people for whom this might work particularly beneficially. And so clearly the Sustainable Development Goal that this was focused on was around good health and well-being. But one of the things that I feel is quite sustainable about this kind of research is that this is quite an easy technique for people to use to enhance their well-being. So unlike other kind of interventions of other well-being wellness programs, things like that, that might require a substantial degree of training, they might require some kind of time commitment, quite extensive time commitment. They might require specialist equipment or that kind of thing. Expressive writing is such an easy thing to do. If you've got a pen and paper, or even if you've got the notes section on your phone or a laptop or whatever, as long as you've got some capacity to write, whether that's in using handwriting or whether that's typing, is some of the work we've done in this area, not in this particular paper that won the prize, but in other projects we've used typing rather than actual handwriting. And just the act of doing these things has shown to be. And so I think this is where this work I think is quite sustainable and meets the UN Sustainable Development Goal, particularly for promoting good health and well-being.
Awesome. Yeah, and I will link that previous podcast episode where Michael talks in more depth about the expressive writing research in the show notes for anybody who is interested in finding out more about that. My next question is to all of you, or whoever feels inspired. Why do you all think it's important to have a sustainability research prize? What really is the goal or the interest in this? And maybe particularly Matthew, when you were reading the papers, kind of did you see a real interest in having such a prize and thinking about research through a sustainability lens?
For me personally, I knew what sustainability was, but I didn't know there's many facets to it. When I thought about sustainability, I just thought of green, promoting green and a better environment and stuff like that. I think it's important for people like me who didn't really know as much about it as maybe Gillian and others to promote a more sustainable environment, really. So that's where I was kind of captured with that.
Yeah, definitely. I think education focus is really big. Gillian or Michael, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say that I think the great thing about this prize is that it's really brought the Sustainable Development Goals and the notion of sustainability more generally more to the forefront of colleagues' minds in the department. With my other hat on, where I'm head of research for the department, I've had some chats with Gillian previously about ways that we can bring these things more to the fore, because they are really important. And they're things that we really need to be focusing on to ensure that our research is impactful. So I think this has been a really good vehicle just for getting colleagues to think more about sustainable development goals and how their work relates to them.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so I think it's like both Matthew and Michael have pointed out, is that initially people's awareness of what we're even talking about when we talk about sustainability, people will immediately, I think, start thinking about recycling and taking public transport and all of the very conventional things which are part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals and are very there is psychology has something to say in all of those areas. But actually, when we think about developing in a way that is, good for health and general well-being and equality and all of those other parts of how we develop sustainably, are things that might not be quite in the forefront of people's minds. They might not be immediately obvious. And by kind of not only just promoting, well, what are the sustainable development goals and encouraging people to think about how their research is relevant, I think what we wanted with the prize was to give some examples so the people who are winning can give an example. And as Matthew said, the way that the students judged, they had to give a score on how close they thought the thing described in the paper, whatever the innovation or the discovery was to having an actual impact and improving things in terms of the goal itself. And the thing with Michael's paper, because as he said, it is actually quite a sustainable intervention to give people expressive writing to do. You don't really need very much to make it happen. But it's also the fact that it's something that could very easily be rolled out and therefore have quite a wide-reaching impact without very much additional work. So it was that thing of like, how close are they in terms of having a real-world impact, where 10 would have been like, they've already done it. They've already substantially improved a number of people's lives. And 1 would be like, they're never going to improve anything in the real world with this, or 0 even would be that. So, obviously, actually, everyone who entered got pretty close and pretty high scores. But I think this one was a winner because we could really see, or the judges said they could really see how easily that could just be rolled out and have an impact meaningfully on quite a large number of people's lives. And that was something that was kind of not actually what I expected to come out of this. So, and again, I just coordinated things. I anonymized the papers and I organized the meetings so that the students could discuss this. And I honestly couldn't necessarily have guessed which of these papers that was entered was going to be the one that they thought would have the most impact. But then I looked at, their scores and their reasoning and it all made sense. But I think that thinking about the expressive writing intervention, that is quite inspiring to me. And I don't do that kind of research at all. Like, I work on risk perception and health inequalities. But it made me think about, well, what can we do that's got really low barriers to participation that can help improve health? What can we do that's like a very, I guess, very achievable thing that will have a large impact? And I think in terms of, we're like really encouraged to think about our impact these days in academia. And in terms of that, I think the prize might help to give a few bits of inspiration to people about like, well, what can we do? And it doesn't have to be that you work with people with type D personality, which this paper was about, to appreciate how the approach that's been taken in that paper could be similar to something you might do in your own work. So I think it's part of it's to acknowledge and recognize the work we're already doing, but a little bit just to maybe inspire people.
Yeah, and on that inspiration note, actually, that leads me to my last question. How do you think both psychology researchers and students can incorporate more sustainability into their research? What do you kind of see as a pathway to including more sustainability in our work?
One of the things that really springs to mind for me, and I think Gillian's just said it, is that I think a key thing that we all need to be doing is thinking about what the impact of our work is going to be. So I think it's just that initial seed, that planting that seed for yourself initially of thinking, why is it that I'm doing this? Why is it that I want to do this work? And research for generating knowledge and understanding for the sake of generating knowledge and understanding is all very good, very important. But you nevertheless still have to think about, how is this work that I'm doing going to change something? Because otherwise, research is expensive. There's a lot of investment that goes into research. And the whole purpose of what we're doing as researchers should be to make a difference in some way beyond an academic setting. Gillian really highlighted the importance of impact. And really, again, I just really think that these sustainable development goals can be a really good way of people sit down before they even start designing a study or really embarking on the research journey and thinking, what is it that I really want to change here? But I think that can be a really kind of useful way in.
Yeah, definitely. Matthew, do you have any thoughts on how students could maybe incorporate more sustainability in their research?
Yeah, well, in the lead up to this, I was kind of thinking of how we could incorporate that, and I was kind of thinking maybe a module at university, maybe a facet of social psychology where we could have students going into maybe Newcastle Town Centre or whatever university it is, and just asking people, one, if they actually know what sustainability is, like when I was highlighting earlier that my knowledge wasn't very vast on the topic, and just kind of gathering answers on a qualitative basis and just kind of gathering that little bit of understanding of what the public actually perceive sustainability to be, and just gather data from there.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea, and working to educate the public and students a bit more about sustainability goals. I think that's an excellent idea. All right, well, that's all my questions. Does anybody have any last thoughts that they'd like to share before we go?
Well, yeah, just on that idea about how we can incorporate sustainability into more of our research, I think sometimes it's not immediately obvious what your area of research, and it might not be psychology, we're talking about psychology here, but what your area of research might have to offer. And then you have these funny little experiences. So for me, quite some time ago now, I went and worked as a visiting scholar with Newcastle City Council, with the public health team there. And I worked on a number of things with them. And one of the things that was really unexpected, but a fascinating experience for me, was they asked me, on the basis of being a psychologist, if I could write them a report about what works for reducing littering. And now, when I went to the public health team, I didn't think that littering would be a primary concern for them. But, it's related to the quality of our environment, and there are some direct health hazards related to littering, but it's also the thing that the council gets hands down the most complaints about is litter. And so I ended up writing a report for them. And this is not my area of expertise. I don't work on littering as a behavior or anything like that. But what I discovered is there is an absolute volume of really interesting psychology research happening about trying to prevent littering. There's even a charity called Keep Britain Tidy who roll out randomized controlled trials of different campaigns to try and prevent littering and different techniques. There are people who are testing different types of bins where they try and gamify recycling and do all sorts of wild stuff to try and encourage greener behavior. And there's just this whole world there around one kind of relatively sort of small and simple topic, or it seems on the face of it. When I first started, I thought, oh, littering, that's quite a sort of small niche topic. But there's so much that can be done to try and nudge human behavior around that. And it ended up being, honestly, one of my favorite little projects I've ever worked on. It was so interesting. And it's not, I still don't think it's in any way in my realm of expertise, but it gave me an idea of the sorts of studies that you can do if you just if you just look around you and you think one problem, one what seemingly small problem, they're never as small as they seem when you from the outside, once you get into it, and just think that one problem, what could psychology offer there? What could we do? How could we change behavior? And there's probably a whole world within that. So I just think that as psychologists in particular, we have a lot of, transferable skills in terms of designing research and studies. We know a lot about behavior. And actually, if we want to change behaviors, you could pick one thing, just one thing, recycling, and you could focus on that and you could do so much potentially. So I just think that actually people need to remember that they've got all of this kind of transferable skills around study design, and you don't necessarily need to immediately know everything about these things, but you might just run one study to see if you can improve recycling rates on campus, for example. And who knows what might come out of it.
Yeah. Wow, that's really inspiring. Thank you for that. Everybody, pick your one problem that you want to solve to make the world better, and we'll start working on that. All right, well, thank you so much to Gillian, Matthew, and Michael for talking to us today about the Northumbria Psychology Sustainability Research Prize. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation.